This is our book club episode, and the book that we're featuring this time is Elatsoe by Darcy Little Badger.
I was going to say, if you like young adult books with strong protagonists who get involved in a mystery and also love things like magic and vampires and a little bit of humor, you'll love Elatsoe.
You would love Elatsoe if you like YA murder mystery that is heavy on the myth and low on the horror and gore. There were really only a couple of spots in the story that felt like real life consequences were happening. A lot of it was you got the mythology story, and that allowed to have something be a creepy monster without your main character necessarily be endangered by it.
Well, then we've covered like how violent it is and then how myth and magic heavy it is. So then I'll also say you will also like this book if you don't care whether or not there's a heavy romance subplot, because in this book, the main character is asexual, so it's just not a big deal. But I know for some readers, that is actually pretty important to have representation in books where romance is not the key goal of any of the characters in the plot. Like, that's just not what they're making all of their life decisions around. So I think it's a beautiful choice for those of us who don't need a romance subplot in order to enjoy the book.
I was sharing with Catherine and Sage that I'm 3 books past when we read this at the date of recording, so I had to go back and start over and re-listen to Elatsoe to get a lot of the details fresh in my brain again. I also know Catherine, when we went to record it the first time, had listened to it twice.
How many books I've read since then? I've read 12 books.
12 books?
They're all audio, and honestly, I've been listening to the Jinky holiday romances that I didn't get to.
I read The People You Meet on Vacation, Unreasonable Hospitality, which is nonfiction, and When the Moon Hatched, which is 700 pages of didn't need to be this long.
That's said so kindly.
I'm halfway through Wuthering Heights, and that one is becoming a bit of a slog for me. I keep putting it aside to read other stuff, and then coming back to it. Basically, halfway through the book, Kathy dies, and then you're like, well, now what's the rest of the whole book? I read it so long ago, and I don't remember it.
Welcome to Book Dragon Banter, a podcast where 3 aspiring authors talk all things books. We're fantasy focused, but we are not fantasy exclusive. With me are my co-hosts.
I am Sage Morel.
And I'm Catherine Suzette.
And I'm Zinzi Bree. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. We attempted this episode previously that got interrupted, so if you're watching this, outfits are changed is because I had to cut in some of the things that we talked about the first time that then we didn't go over the second time. This is 2 recording sessions smushed into one because we love this book and had so much to say. This is our book club episode. We do 1 book a month. You can read along with us. You can find us under Fantasy Focused, Book Dragon Banter, and it is run by me, Zinzi Bree. They're on Fable.
I don't think I've even joined our book club on Fable yet, so thanks for that reminder. I need to join our book club.
Yep, now that you've already read the book that's for this month.
Twice.
I'm having a good time over there.
All right, well, I better join so I can come have a good time too.
Yes. Do it. This month we were reading Elatsoe. It took me listening to the audiobook to realize that's how it is pronounced when I was looking at it before. I absolutely was calling it Elatsoe, but it is Elatsoe, which I think is really pretty, actually.
I liked the symbolism in choosing Elatsoe, both for like how it sounds, how beautiful it sounds, and also because it stands for hummingbird, and it seemed to fit the character so beautifully.
And it's also the name of great grandmother Elatsoe that we got to hear the legends about throughout the story, and that was one of my favorite parts.
Since this is a book club episode, we are sharing lots of details about the book. If you haven't read it yet, please go check it out, read it, and then come back and listen along with us. It's fantastic, and we highly recommend.
Why did we pick Elatsoe? That is a good question that I gave myself, and you guys can't answer because I picked the book. Don't know why I did that.
I picked it because we trust Zinzi.
I picked Elatsoe partly because the cover looked like winter. I didn't realize it was a bunch of ghost dogs until looking at the cover later. I thought she was in just a bunch of snow, right? So I was like, oh, great. This is a winter book. We'll do this winter book in January. It's got myths and tales that are from mythology that we hadn't read yet. So those were parts of picking it up, as well as looking at it on Goodreads. It just has a bunch of awards and nominations and the good things that qualify it. So I'm going to go ahead and read. Elatsoe is written by Darcy Little Badger. It is her debut novel. Elatsoe has received 5-starred reviews from Kirkus Reviews, Publishers Weekly, Booklist, Book Page, and Shelf Awareness, and is a New England Book Award for Young Adult finalists. It was also listed by Time Magazine as one of the 100 best fantasy books of all time, and by Publishers Weekly as one of the best books of 2020. So that's a lot of praise, high praise for a debut fantasy novel. I wanted to know, did it live up to the hype of all of those awards, of all of these people saying, hey, this is a quality book?
So when I first read the book blurb on the back, I was surprised. I had like some preconceptions around the book from the cover and the first couple of sentences. But then when I learned that not only was it a book about Elatsoe, who is a Apache teenager, but she also like lives in this world where there's modern mythology magic, where there's ghost spirits from historical upbringing and tribal background. There's vampires that exist, and there's other forms of magic that are like from different cultural influences in the United States. And I was like, wow, that sounds amazing. And then I learned it's a murder mystery. It's got the main character is an asexual teenager. So I brought together a bunch of very cool elements that I did not expect to find all in one book.
And it brought them together really well, right? Like it didn't feel disjointed.
So
It didn't
well.
feel like, oh, this is weird. This is way out of left field. What is like vampires? What are vampires doing? But like they were presented in a way of, oh, this makes sense. It's a curse. It functions this way, which stayed kind of within the mythology that this version of America was building, right?
Yeah, all the elements that were included. I was like, there's no way that this is gonna, it sounds amazing, and there's no way that it's all gonna come together. And it totally did.
Oh,
Yeah.
and that there's Fae, and you could be a descendant of Oberon, right? So you could teleport through mushroom fairy rings. Like the fact that that was legalized and formalized, and, you know, there's stations for the idea that instead of going, oh, I'm going to go to the bus station or the train station, you go to the fairy ring station and you get approval to go through and get teleported through fairy magic all the way to some other part of the country.
Yeah. It was like tearing a wormhole in reality temporarily in order to transport them. And I was like, whoa, love this. There's all the current science and everything. It's just this alternate reality where basically any form of magic is possible.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it isn't brought into the book, it didn't seem like there was like genuinely a limit, but it did seem like the families kept their particular magical affinities and how to access those within the family.
Secrets.
And that was perfectly acceptable in the culture. Thought that was fascinating.
It was also interesting to me that they had the best friend, he's descendant of Oberon, right? So he had the ability to summon will-o'-the-wisps, the little light balls, right? And that was a inherited magic versus Elatsoe's, who is the magic, she has a natural gift, but the secret of doing it is still considered to be passed down generationally from oldest daughter to oldest daughter in that family. If you can't tell from the way we're talking about it, we don't do star ratings, but this was a fascinating story. Highly recommend. I absolutely agree with the awards that it was getting. It just was magical and married lots of unexpected elements all together in a way that was enjoyable. Maybe my only criticism, and that's just a personal taste, is I would also love to see this world handled in not a YA, but an adult book that's about this, that's in this setting, and maybe deals with some of the other factions that choose to prey upon the disenfranchised, which is part of what happened during this story.
I really loved about it was that it had Ellie was sort of like a teen detective in this story. And I've read a lot of YA books, not necessarily fantasy derived, but where there's like a teen detective. And so then there's multiple, they're part of a series, but it's sort of like, they're almost like standalones where you could read that story and it's that same detective, right? But it's a teenager. And I could see this becoming something like that, where she went on other mysteries that happened. This one was very personal for herself, but I could see it turning into something where it kind of hinted at that towards the end of the book. That was the direction she wanted to go, was becoming this kind of investigator.
I'll read Elatsoe's paranormal investigations, right?
I'm here for it. I guess I really loved that this world build didn't feel hefty as a read. Like the possibilities were endless, but it didn't feel like we spent a lot of time absorbing the facts about this world. It felt so natural and believable that I was like, yeah, we could totally be living in that reality. And I just didn't know it. I will go live in that other dimension right now. Give me a fairy ring. I will jump.
And in kind of classic young adult fashion, the world fantasy young adult, the world building was clear, but not overly bogged down with details, like Catherine was saying. But I actually, so I love the epic fantasies, and I actually wanted more. Fantasy world is so fantastically done. I want more. I want more details. I want to know more about everything, not just Elatsoe's personal family history and how magic works with them. We got a decent amount of that, but I could have used more of that. But I wanted to know, like, I imagine that throughout the United States in different parts, so I could have just kept reading that part of it, more and more detail.
Yeah.
What were you surprised by? I think the thing that I loved the most and was surprised by, because it feels like most YAs, and I kind of feel like we're trained to have this, and it makes it just easier for young adult characters to have agency, right? When they're rebellious against their parents, where their parents have told them no and they're sneaking out and they go on this adventure, or they're orphans, their parents are dead, or like there's always some excuse for why a parent isn't present on the adventure. And I loved that this one didn't do any of that, that the parents listened to their kid, that were like, okay, you're right, I believe you. Let's follow up on this. But it wasn't done in a way where it took away any of her agency. It wasn't like, okay, honey, I'll take care of this. You don't do anything. It's now my job because I'm the parent, right? It was still her making decisions and leading what happened next. And her parents were there to come alongside and support, but not take over. And that to me was surprising, as well as just so well done and appreciated to read, because we don't get enough of that in fiction, in fantasies in general.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I look for most in books is like positive representation of a lot of these things, because usually the genetic family is the bio family, whatever family they were raised in, is somehow not suited to moving forward in life or in that journey with the character, especially in a YA or young adult, new adult, that kind of thing. I really loved that as well. And when I read it a second time, I read that ending, I was like, what happened to the mom? Because I forgot where she was in the last chapters. But when I reread it, I was able to pay attention to where she was a little bit more. And I was like, yeah, she was really involved with everything. And it reminded me a little bit. My mother is in some ways my best adventure partner too. And so I like to see that kind of thing in a book, positive representation of, family.
I was a little surprised when it went to the mom's perspective late in the book. And when it happened, I was like, whoa, really enjoyed that chapter. And it was interesting to see some of the same people and scenario going down from the mom's perspective versus from Ellie's perspective. That was really interesting. The other thing that surprised me a lot in this one was how much, and kind of early on in the book and then consistently, it went into the storytelling mode where somebody was telling a story, usually of sixth grade, Ellie's ancestor. And in hindsight, that I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because oral history and telling stories orally is like a native tradition. Before there was the written word, people would do a lot of storytelling. And so the fact that that was a cultural element made so much sense, and it was handled so beautifully, and it became some of my favorite parts of the book. But it surprised me when it first came up, because I feel like in young adult, the pacing is often a little quicker, and that storytelling kind of slowed the plot pacing down. but was just so good. Handled really well.
But a lot of times, even with those stories, though, they were adventure stories. That was sixth grade dealing with the, right, like the leech monster, or sixth grade, or when Elatsoe falls into the river and then starts remembering a story of the, like the river monster.
Yeah.
I felt like this book had that whole thing of being like unexpected and inevitable, so that when you learned what was happening and that the doctor was using magic to steal health from people and was generally taking like the disenfranchised and
The people nobody would care about.
yeah, to support his wealthy white, community. It was like I didn't expect it, but also I'm totally not surprised. Of course, that was what was happening. I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, I think that the author handled that really respectfully, because that is honestly something that I struggle with sometimes in my pleasure of a book. It doesn't take away from like the quality of the book at all, but sometimes it can take away from my pleasure when not just like cultural diversity is pointed out, but sexual diversity and economic diversity, all those things become such a hefty point that the author is trying to make. And in this one, it didn't detract from my pleasure. I felt pleasure at how it was done, how respectfully and well represented all these various concerns were. I mean, and she brought in everything. I even liked that there was like discussion of the vampire from the end, right to the land and things like that. So there's this thing in the book where Ellie's family and other Apache nation could kick vampires off of their land by removing the welcome kind of a thing. But then when removed the welcome from this final vampire and like it didn't work because it turns out he's actually with an Apache. I was like, what?
I can't remember the details of it, but it was like, I could tell he was clearly in danger of his immortal life, right? And that was one of the highlights for me because I'm a vampire nerd, and that was such an unexpected and yet worked so well with the story that she was telling and the cultural and magical present day that she was creating. It was fantastic. And then, for the other vampire to have that, it was his home. So then that was
like, your trick doesn't work on me. What next, little girl?
Yeah, so like they used like Chekhov's gun really well, but then also it did not work out in Elatsoe's favor, which is like that oh shit moment, in a plot where you're like, oh shit, this plan is not going according to plan.
How do you do that well? How do you include ghosts and vampires and cars while still making it feel grounded and realistic? Versus, I hate to continue to rag on Twilight, but like Twilight, you still know is fantasy, paranormal. There aren't agencies and blood banks supporting the vampires that are publicly known about, right? It's all secret society and hidden. Versus in Elatsoe, there's vampires and it's a curse and it's known, and there's blood banks and there's, whole systems in the government that keeps track of who the vampires are and what stages they are at, or at least attempts to do so. I just realized that having done the re-listen of like, oh, that's when they introduced Ronnie's boyfriend character that is the vampire. I'm blanking on his name, even though I just heard it like 10 minutes ago.
Al,
thank you. In introducing him, they introduced the whole conversation of it's a curse, it's foreign, it's not an American thing, it came over. Anyway, it was really fun. The use of vampires, we're like, yes, they are bloodsuckers, but it's normalized and they've got blood banks and it's not like this big horror thing. And there's even the option of, if you don't want to stay a vampire, you can pay to have the curse removed.
I thought that was really cool. Unusual. Like a cure is some very, very coveted thing in a vampire culture. Like if there is a cure, it's like, the whole quest is to go find it. But in this, it was just like, if you have enough money and you actually want to not be immortal, because there was benefits to becoming a vampire, then you can pay for the cure.
I particularly want to say, having just re-listened to the beginning of it, I had a slight misunderstanding, but the first time I read it, I thought that her friend Jay had a crush on her. And then on this re-listen, I went, wait, Jay just broke up with his girlfriend. That's what he's doing at the bridge with the graffiti, right? Is trying to go put a lightning bolt through the now broken heart. So I was misreading part of their relationship. And even with that misread, the first time I listened to it, I still was like, Jay's really cool. It's a good friendship. He's respectful. Like when he accidentally says, oh, it's a date, like he's like, wait, did I make it weird? I hope I didn't make it weird
That was
for you.
adorable.
And they smooth that out, right? It's nice to have a coming of age story that your coming of age doesn't revolve around somebody else, right?
Yes.
Your coming of age is just you coming into your own and coming
Yes.
into better understanding of your abilities. That's part of Elatsoe's story. Her being asexual wasn't the point of the story. It's not her discovering that. It's not other people coming to accept that. There aren't any characters that are doing the, oh, you'll change your mind, you'll want to have kids later, right? Sage brought up in that first one that her gift is passed down not through bloodline like Jay's gift is with being of the Oberon fairy line.
I totally pictured him with the adorable, like, freckles and everything and, like, that lithe body because he's a gymnast and, like...
He's a cheerleader.
Cheerleader, that. I loved to have the male cheerleader. That was amazing.
Yeah, and
Super
he didn't have
appreciative.
to be non-binary or gay to fully enjoy that sport and to love doing what he's doing.
Mhm.
Really thoroughly enjoyed that. I love that in Elatsoe, like, they're genuine, supportive friends that accept each other's preferences, whether that's sexual or romantic or gender or sport-related or magic-related. They respect, even their family secrets with the magic and things like that. There's no pushing, there's no prodding, there's no trying to pressure one's friends into changing or being or coming alongside and doing something different than what is right for them. I loved that Darcy Little Badger represented that so beautifully because I want to see more of that in this world.
Another highly recommend for Elatsoe is it's rife with healthy relationships as opposed to being full of these screwed up ones.
Mm-hmm.
Elatsoe isn't some traumatized teen, right, who's running away from XYZ problems or bad parenting or sibling death. She's got a healthy relationship with her parents. Her parents are supportive. When she goes, I had a dream where Cuz came and talked to me and said I was murdered by Abe Allerton from the town of Willoughby. Dad looks it up on a map and goes, Willoughby is 30 miles from where your cousin's school was. I believe you. We're going to let the police do their job, but then also we're going to send an anonymous tip. We're going to follow up. We're going to support you and go pursue this. I believe you.
Mm-hmm.
Jay came along and was like, oh, you think your cousin was murdered? Okay, I'm on board. What can I do from home, from the computer, to research and to help you figure this out? Al and Ronnie is the older sister of Jay, and she goes, well, I'm in. Al went to go search for this thing for you, and now he's missing, and I gotta go find him, and you're telling me this is what the deal is. Okay, I'm gonna suit up, and I'm gonna be ready to face this with you, right? Like, it was just support, as well as you have in the relationship with Lenore. This is the grieving widow, new mom, she's got a baby, but she's having the appropriate reaction of going, you can speak to ghosts. You can bring him back. Let me talk to him. Let me say goodbye. My last conversation was, do you want soup for dinner? Like, how awful and gut-wrenching to be in a world where the option where, you've got Vivian and Elatsoe, who both have the ability to speak with ghosts and to raise ghosts, even if the only ones that they're supposed to is animals. Like, that temptation as someone who's grieving to be able to have that conversation, that closure, to have the person that you love back in some way, like, that is in there. That's part of the book, but it's handled in a way that doesn't make Lenore a monster. Because that could have been the story, right? Lenore could have been like, I'm going to bring him back no matter what. I'm going to force it. And while she still does stuff in that direction, she's not ultimately the cause that brings Trevor's ghost back to haunt the town.
She also was from a different cultural upbringing. So she had a different understanding of the concept of bringing a ghost back. And so making her desire all the greater. And it would be tragic to feel like you could see that person again if only your darn cousin would listen to you and bring the ghost back. I was going to ask what you guys thought about this, because you were saying that there's all these healthy relationships and that the main character, who is a teenager, doesn't have like this angst and trauma and all of this kind of stuff. And I mean, there's the trauma of the cousin dying, but that's like specific to the plot, not something that she was dealing with. And I'm wondering if you think that a part of that is a bit of the nature of the fact that it's a murder mystery. And very often in a mystery situation with the detective character, they do not go through a big arc of change. She learned to trust her power and herself more fully by the end of the story, but she did not like overcome trauma, or her character arc it wasn't fully a flat arc, but it was not as big of an arc as maybe a story that's more of a coming of age story.
That's valid.
I think that it's also valid a lot of the times for us to read stories, especially YA, where the younger people are coming of age through difficulty, because that is also pretty valid to a lot of experiences. However, I love that instead of strength coming from the trauma, her strength is coming from the family. And yeah, that means that there isn't a great character arc in the sense that it's very noticeable, but it is beautiful all the same to witness Elatsoe choose herself, choose her power, make the right choice.
I thought that the belief in her cultural experience of being able to speak with ghosts and even visit the land of the dead, even though she loved her cousin and she was devastated by his murder because he was cut off in the prime of his life. He had a new baby. He had many years ahead of him and he was murdered. So she wanted to bring the murderer to justice. But there also, and there was grief, but she didn't have the same level of grief that the cousin did. Lenore? Yeah. Who maybe didn't have as deep-seated of a... I don't remember if it went too deeply into her personal beliefs. I mean, it seemed like, she knew the dead existed as like ghosts that came back because she could see Elatsoe's dog. But for Elatsoe, it was like, yeah, and someday when I die, then I will be reunited with Trevor and we will live together in that afterlife, right? Even though she was grieving for his death, there was a little bit of that connection continuing.
There's a line, and I'm not going to be able to bring it up and quote it from memory, but she even mentions, I will see you, but she cuts herself off from saying, I'll see you soon, because she doesn't want to curse herself, basically, with it happening too soon. I also thought it was really interesting culturally, and I'm assuming that this is a Lip and Apache cultural thing, is them not saying the name, taking away the pictures, right? Having a hidden burial place. I was just thinking about that because I think Lenore, I thought it was mentioned that she was maybe Hispanic. It just made me think about like the ofrenda and that different cultural of like, for them, you would put all of the pictures of those who have passed and you would talk about them and tell their stories. And like those two things would be in complete opposition.
Yeah.
I loved how I fully expected Trevor to come back from the dead and be raised as a ghost. Like I felt like that seed was planted. There was a number of seeds that were planted. The party that they ended up going to was mentioned early in the story. And I was like, oh, they're going to end up at this party and that's going to be this big fun kind of, scene that's going to come up. And I fully expected Trevor to be brought back from the dead, but I didn't know how that would happen, right? I loved that it was the son, the baby son, who had the power that Elatsoe had that ancestral gift, was the one who, found his father in a dream in the afterlife and touched him and brought him back. And it was through love. And it wasn't like this revenge or, trying to hide the evidence or Elatsoe making a mistake or the grief. It was just like through the love, the innocent love of the child for the father. And I thought that was so beautiful. And then like you couldn't be mad at the kid for that happening. I really loved that was the triggering moment for the vengeful ghost being pulled back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Elatsoe's reaction to the ghost, too. Like, she had a very down-to-earth vibe with all of her reaction to the supernatural stuff. Like, her kind of character was very engaging and said this before, I would happily read a whole series of Elatsoe as a, supernatural detective dealing with different, this was a very personal crime because it was a member of her family. I would hope that maybe she was dealing with crimes not having to do with her family just for her own sake in the future. But I could see that being so fun. And her demeanor was with the ghost was, I think, Catherine, it's similar to what you were saying. It wasn't this horrifying thing for this ghost to be brought back. Everyone had told her that if he came back, he wouldn't be his real self. She expected that. But she wasn't really angry at him. She wasn't full of hatred towards this revenge ghost. She was like, hey, it's time. You got to go back. We're done here. Game over. Just go back. And she was very matter of fact about it. And I loved that. That was also like a very realistic feeling for how her character and her character's beliefs was described. That's how I would expect her to kind of act in that situation. It was emotional for her, for sure, because it's her cousin's ghost. But she was ready for it because of her training from all the stories of sixth great grandmother and from her mom and her dad, like her family heritage, her grandmother. She was capable of dealing with that ghost.
So something that I wanted to going back a little bit on what Sage said, where Elatsoe is so calm about a lot of her interactions with the ghostly stuff and the supernatural and things like that, right? And to me, a little bit of that comes specifically from her parents. And here's one of the lines that I highlighted because I just thought that this was something really cool, but that I don't necessarily think about, is this happens after the parents learn about Trevor's death, right? And it's, her father continued, because he was capable of calm speech, practicing veterinary medicine had not hardened his heart, but it had taught him how to restrain signs of pain. Because I do feel like sometimes for those people who have to deal with stressful situations, who have to deal with emotional things, right? They have to put on this, okay, I'm calm, I can handle this logically, we're not going to bring the emotions into it. And it's not because they're unfeeling, right? They do feel pain, they do feel those things. They have just learned to work around it because there's still a job to do. It doesn't harden their hearts. That was something cool. And more often the interactions with someone from the medical industry is someone who's like, oh, well, this is a doctor who's a stuck-up jerk and is rich, right? Or it's like, that tends to be in romance novels, or they go one of two ways. Either they're cold-hearted or they're a bleeding heart where everything affects them and they're crying in the closet.
Well, what you just said, like the cold-hearted doctor who's rich and whatever, that was the bad guy, right? That was Abe Allerton. He had that snobbery and I'm so great and I have no capacity for empathy for anybody outside of my small, close-knit community of people, mostly because they love me and will pay me money and support my fame and rich lifestyle.
He believes that his family line, that his gift, right, is like God's gift to humanity. Like, it's the best thing. This entire town is not only willing to give up their lives to protect his secret, to protect this because of the trickle-down effect of the money that he brings in, the knowing, I mean, if your kid had a terminal illness and you could switch it with somebody that you didn't care about and your child could be healthy and have the rest of their life, that would be, it's wrong. You can understand it. It's wrong though.
Right. And if you have empathy for the concept of like humans and life, even though, yes, it's your child. And of course that's devastating, but you're going to put that on someone else's child. Now, maybe somebody, then there was like, we're talking abstractly here, but then there was the whole piece where they were putting it on people they thought were less than them by being non-white people.
They were choosing the disenfranchised.
Making it even worse. Like, bad enough that you are claiming that your life or the life of your loved one is worth more than someone else's life. But to then be targeting people based on their race or position in the world. It's like, appreciated the author for going there very much.
Yeah, but so respectfully and kindly, even to the extent that she brought in Teddy Roosevelt and gave the attack by the bear and made a comment about the things that he'd said about Native Americans as a whole and things like that. I thought that was interesting. It was subtle, but it made an impactful point. Books don't have to grapple super strongly with the main point that they want to get across, like the moral or ethical point necessarily. Sometimes subtle is stronger and packs more punch. In this particular case, the subtlety is its weapon. And I think it's a beautifully wielded one.
I appreciated that Elatsoe's friend Jay was a white kid, because it turned it not into a one racial group against another story. It turned it into a story of power and the people in power taking advantage of those with less power in society. I don't even remember if she went super in depth with, there was definitely the understanding that throughout history, that town, which I guess was magically moving around, maybe through use of the mushrooms, but they were basically moving around and putting their diseases onto whoever. It was maybe the Lipan Apache people in that community when they arrived there, maybe I think they said 80 years ago, or I can't remember 30 years. I don't remember how long they'd been in Texas. But before that, I think the town had started in New England. Presumably they were putting the disease onto Black people or super poor people or people that were not of their same background. And I thought that was really well handled, since she didn't just say, okay, my main characters are all from this one racial group and the bad guys are all from this other racial group. There was a nice diversity, a diversity undertone, but it didn't feel like a fight. It felt more like, let's explore the nature of when people in power take advantage of others. I thought it was so wonderfully handled.
So when Ellie and her dad come into town at Willoughby, I wanted to comment on the foreshadowing that she does, something she does really early on. The sign, the state, Texas, was recently added to the sign, right? She makes a comment about, she wonders what was underneath that. And that's that's an early hint that this town has moved around, that it wasn't always part of Texas. When Dr. Allerton comes to the funeral and talks to Ellie about Kirby, the ghost dog, and she makes a comment, she's like, it's a family secret. And he goes, I know all about those. That already there is the planted of, the thing that he's got going on, the thing that killed the cousin, right, is this family secret, this lineage of body swapping, injury swapping, right? It was interesting seeing just those early plants right towards the ends to foreshadow what comes at the end and the reveal of what it is that he's doing by the end of the story.
Foreshadowed a number of things. The party. She foreshadows the party by bringing in, they see a flyer about it or something like that, and then they end up there. There was the foreshadowing, even the part that I loved so much when her mom, Vivian, when they're attacked by the vampire and they're in their car and the vampire's attacking them. It seems like that was a tense moment. What's going to happen? The vampire is faster than you, stronger than you, and out for blood, right? You're trying to get the baby. The baby was in the car with them, stress. The mom says, I know you're not welcome in my home, which I loved because that's such a traditional vampire trait, is having to be invited in. And then it was because that vampire's home was not America. That vampire's home was presumably Europe somewhere. And so that planted the idea that
he had to run off
of
Lipan Apache land.
Yeah. And then that vampire was actually from that area and had been cursed many generations ago. But I loved that. But there was all of these really nice narrative elements that she either brought up early on that played out very well later on. It was that classic thing where I always think authors should strive for, of being unexpected but inevitable. This book felt like that. The story felt like that. And it was like I was saying, with the baby bringing the dad to life. I expected Trevor's ghost to be risen, but I didn't expect the baby to do it. But that felt so perfect. And Darcy Little Badger, really, there was so many moments in the book where she beautifully wove together these elements and took advantage of things that she had laid out at the beginning. I'd be very curious to know what her writing process is, because It felt very thoughtfully laid out.
Another thing to go back on the foreshadowing, one of the Great Six stories contains that Great Six had made dog toys for her dogs, right? The little rattle doll. And then when Kirby comes back and he's carrying one of those to just, because at first when I read it, I was like, where did he get this? Did he meet Great Six, sixth grade? And then with this re-listening and hearing, oh, it's embedded in one of those stories. Like, she makes those. That's for her ghost dogs. So he absolutely, whatever that encounter was, Kirby got to meet and interact with sixth grade before getting sent back or maybe guided back to Elatsoe, to Ellie. In this particular circumstance, it was set up for us as readers to believe that, like, here's this extra sign of approval, even from Great Six, who we've spent this whole book getting to hear stories about. And I just appreciated that additional touch. Part of what I think all three of us love about this story is that it is a book about stories. It is a book about the knowledge imparted through story, the family connections built through story, right? But then there are also these lines that are just beautiful. And one that I highlighted that I wanted to bring up was, how long would it take for the earth to heal? When would the sap on the metal-scarred tree harden into amber? It seemed odd that an act so violent and cruel could leave gemstones in its wake.
I feel like we highlighted the same passages.
Also, one of those bookend moments, the Coyote Woman, the Coyote people, is talked about between her and her parents early on in the story, and that they're rare, that they don't show up very often, and they stay hidden. And then her coming at the end and saying, oh, she stayed out of this town, but now she can be in this town, right? Because at this point in the story, Ellie has pulled the mansion into the underworld along with Abe Allerton and has rid the town effectively of the evil that was present, right? And now the coyote feels safe to be able to come back. Trevor asked her to keep his family safe, and she's done that, both in getting the justice for him and that Abe Allerton gets his comeuppance by all of the hungry spirits that are of the dead that he took the lives from, but also in that he's gone to a place, and even the town has gone to a place where it can no longer harm Trevor's family. Full circle. We touched on plot twists, we touched on the humor, we touched on character arc, we touched on the world building, we touched on how racism was handled, how diversity was handled in the course of the story. It delivered on its premise. It's a murder mystery, so plot twists, like there was never Abe Allerton was introduced as the villain, and it was just a matter of how do we prove that he did it. We talked about some favorite lines. The only thing that I additionally could consider talking about was the scene where Ellie they stop at the gas station on the road trip, and she goes into the gas station that has the fossil museum in the back, and the interaction she has with that clerk who's like, I'm watching you on the camera, and she has to get the receipt on the Post-it note from who runs the museum right after she buys the fossil. And she's in the museum walking around doing here, my hands are behind my back. I'm not spending too little time. I'm not spending too much time. Where are the camera? And like all of that internal dialogue that you have when somebody has already been rude to you and suspicious of you because of how you look. Like that was another moment of like, even though this is an alternate world, that racism, that mistreatment in the subtle ways, or not so subtle because it's being presented to us this way from Ellie's perspective where she's recognizing it's not subtle, right? That interaction just sucks that it's still happening all the time.
Absolutely.
I so appreciated that. It feels like if you are not in the position of experiencing something like that, you don't necessarily think about it. So for that to be brought up in that way, and it was artfully written to where if you are not regularly used to being in that position, you might be like, wait, what? I mean, there was the internal dialogue, but with the receipt particularly, I was like, wait, what's going on? And then it came full circle. And I was like, oh, yeah. I read another book where there was something similar where there was two characters driving in a car and they were stopped to ask a police a question, just like innocently. And the person driving was a white person and the companion was a black person. And he was like, you cannot argue with the police, not with me in the car. Just these moments where it's brought not just like the big thing of the villain being having this big race, racism, but to have it be in the daily small interactions. I was so appreciative of that.
It brought to mind for me when I was reading that scene, and I want to bring this back to like, this is a great representation of how women go about their lives, and we work extra hard to watch out for and maintain our safety.
Yeah.
And there are other commenters in the world who are like, we're not all like that and we're not this way or whatever. And like, same in this story, we're not all intentionally racist. We're not all going out there and being harmful and all that kind of thing. But that doesn't change the fact that Ellie needs to pay attention to these things because it's for her own safety. She needs the receipt in order to prove that she did not steal something, because she knows that there is a good chance she will be asked for it later on, because there is an assumption that because Ellie looks differently, she's from a different culture, that she will be assumed as doing something wrong. She's not where she's supposed to be or doing what she's supposed to do. And like even in the library and things like that, I think that is a beautiful way of representing how the experience of one human or one gender or one culture or whatnot cannot necessarily be understood outside of things like a book or personal experience. And like those are different levels of understanding, but I think that books are how we build empathy. I think they're how we build compassion. I think they're how we build a better world. I really do. It's through story. It's through connection, empathy. That was done excellently. Like, can we just say that every tiny thing that Darcy Little Badger did was amazing?
We're big fans. That brings us to the end of the episode for this one. Thank you so much for joining us. If you liked this deep dive into Elatsoe, give us a review. It's really helpful for visibility and for people who are checking it out to know that we're good quality. Outside of the podcast, we run monthly writing retreats as Book Dragon Inc., as well as I run weekly Zoom write-ins as Write With Me Cincy Bree. You can find information about those in the show notes. We would love for you to check it out. Thank you so much for tuning in. Our February book, which is cozy romantasy, because February, there should be romance, right? See you next time. Bye.
Bye. That was fun.